Record said,
All right.
hello, and this is Robert Griffin, and I want to thank you for taking time to be with us today on Bishop Talk, and I'm glad that you are with us. This is one of the many shows that I have done from time to time of bringing very unique and interesting people who are connected to me in some shape, form, or fashion on different topics. And today, I'm really honored and humbled by having my longtime friend. Before I knew any of his titles or anything that he did, I knew him just as Jim Mitulski. But Jim Mitulski and I have been friends, I'm going to say nearly at least 20 years, maybe a little bit longer than 20 years. And we have served together in different facets throughout the metropolitan community churches and in other areas around HIV and AIDS, worked together. Which is both near and dear to both of our hearts and our passion. Jim is a lifelong advocate. He's a lifelong learner. I probably would say if it was not for Jim Mitulski, I would not be sitting here with a doctorate degree as one of the things behind my name right now because of his efforts around education and pushing people to get higher education around theological training and everything. So I'm very grateful for that for Jim and many others along that way. So today I'm glad to have my friend Jim Mitulski with me on Bishop Talk. And so, Jim, I'm going to let you self-introduce yourself and then we'll dive into some of our topics for the day. Welcome, Jim Mitulski.
Thank you, Robert. It is so wonderful to be here with you today. And normally I wouldn't correct you, but actually our history goes back 30 years or more, believe it or not. Math is not my strong point, but I did a little checking before earlier, and I'm grateful for all of it. You know,
Wow.
from I remember meeting you when you were a young minister at an MCC General Conference, and uh, our colleague Elder Nori Rost and I decided we were going to corrupt is not the right word. Um, Help educate you into a more liberal position than you were exhibiting at the moment, and
Form me and mold me and shape me.
well, enlist you. Maybe how about that? Um, I'm the pastor of the Congregational Church of the Peninsula in Belmont, California. It's a United Church of Christ congregation, and I am also a minister. I'm a minister in the United Church of Christ. Also proud to be credentialed in the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, which is a denomination of largely same-gender loving, largely African American Pentecostal churches under the prelacy of Bishop Yvette Flunder, and also proud to be a minister in the Metropolitan Community Churches. I was ordained in 1983, and I have maintained my identity and my affiliation with the Metropolitan Churches, the historically LGBT churches, and that particular vocational commitment has probably shaped most of my life, I would say. But in the course of it, I pastored churches in New York City, in San Francisco, in Dallas, including at the Cathedral of Hope, in Denver, in Duluth, Minnesota, and in Los Angeles before returning back here to work in suburban San Francisco, basically. And I also worked with the MCC denomination on as an officer and elder for several years, working in theological education. That was one of the projects that I was able to work with Robert on for many years. We helped train together a generation of leaders for the metropolitan community churches. And I worked with them on HIV and other issues too. Um, but in addition to that, and I hope relevant to this conversation, I like to think that I've been as active outside the church as I have been in the church,
Mm.
and trying to bridge the two worlds. So I served several years on Ryan White HIV federal funding for San Francisco Commission, and I've been active in HIV/AIDS organizations, and perhaps relevant for today, in the NAACP, the ACLU, a number of organizations that I belong to, but on immigration issues, and which I think is the most important pressing issue facing our country at this moment.
Mm. You know, Jim, as you was laying out kind of your lineage, if you will, your footprints that you have left all over the place, really. Just for a moment, what would you probably say? Just give me your top three things that you were proud of the most in all of your travels, your denominational work and cross-denominational work, national, local. What would be your probably your top three things that you're most proud of?
Well, one that you referenced, Robert, that I still feel proud about all these years later is I think I really helped introduce a new level and breadth of theological education into the MCC churches, and that meant bridge building between seminaries and churches. And there was a lot of suspicion that went both ways. Um, when I first became ordained at MCC in 1983, there was a lot of antagonism towards formal theological education, and it came from a couple of different places,
Mhm.
from theologically conservative evangelical Christians who made up the bulk of MCC, who thought of higher education as sort of, they called it cemetery instead of seminary, where faith goes to die.
All right.
And then also the part that brought me to MCC, which was the sort of feminist liberation theology uh, piece, where there was some questioning about whether there would be any value in seminaries, particularly those steeped in Western Christian traditions. And I believe there was, and I still maintain that. And so that's one thing. I think that MCC really pioneered having more openly LGBT students in higher education, in theological education, than any other denomination. And I mean openly LGBT, as well as our allies. So we changed them and they changed us. So that's one. Secondly, I think if I look back, I could say I'm proud of having pastored the MCC church in San Francisco
Mm.
for 15 years during the 80s and 90s, um, which was I've always thought this, that God gathered gay churches in the 60s and 70s
Mm.
so that there would be churches that would be home and sanctuary for people with HIV and AIDS in the 80s and 90s.
Wow.
And so my congregation was one of those. It was a queer congregation, queer as they get. And because it was San Francisco too, and it was edgy and artsy and and political, just like you'd expect something in San Francisco at that era to be. But it also was an AIDS church.
Mm.
We called ourselves the Church with AIDS. And famously, uh, Letty Russell, who was a feminist theologian at the time, wrote a book about that, using that title, The Church with AIDS. And I think that we really were proudly that, we pioneered a model that was not doing ministry to people with HIV, which was how a lot of mainline churches at the time approached it, sort of a kind of a pitying kind of
Mhm.
approach, but we were accompanying. We were people with HIV working side by side with others and allies to do ministry to and with each other. So it was a different kind of model. It was an HIV centered model.
Mhm.
So I'm proud of that. And even though I don't know if proud is the right word, but I will say this, probably one of the most life-changing experiences I had that really reflected my expanded consciousness was 20 over 20 years ago now, or about 20 years ago, going to South Africa and Zimbabwe
Mhm.
with Bishop Yvette Flunder to do AIDS work, HIV work there. Again, where I learned, I thought we were going, and we did do this. We smuggled HIV medications that were not available at the time, but they had been available for 10 years into Zimbabwe. Maybe brought, it's a better word, but it was an illegal importation. Uh, and I thought we were going there to do something, and I learned and gained so much more
Mm.
from the experience and with the people of the Mother of Peace Orphanage in Matuko, Zimbabwe at the time. It changed me and really changed my life too. So I don't know, there are three different things, but they all remain formative influences. And really one thing that MCC taught me was not only about the importance of ministry with, but of going out of your comfort zone and
Mm.
going to where people are, not expecting them to come to you. That was the success of MCC San Francisco. We took church out of the building and into the community. It's I learned that when I went to El Salvador too,
Mhm.
just 10 or maybe 12 years ago, and learned about grassroots liberation theology and the importance of solidarity with transgender people. But I had to go there to learn what I learned and then bring it back here. And if you'll pardon a compliment, I think that that has been one of the things that you and Durrell together have done at Sunshine Cathedral. It has always been an important marker leader church in MCC. Under your leadership, you've brought it to other denominational connections as well. And you are the queerest church in the world. I mean, that is really true. And I pastored a couple of churches that have coveted that title, and in their way were also. But I think that in the best possible sense, you embody queer liberation theology at the Sunshine Cathedral. And so I just want to appreciate that from the outside.
Well, thank you, and thank you for sharing, your top three really, because that really is kind of paving the way of from education, pastoral work, and your global work, if you will, and tying it both back to the queer part of who we are,
Mhm.
which is identity. I know a lot of people, even in the gay and lesbian bisexual community, don't embrace, but at the Sunshine Cathedral, that is an identity that we own because it's a needed identity right now, I think, for so many reasons, for kind of sense for such a time as this. And listening to your top three and knowing your background and your ministry and how we've kind of crossed paths over the years, it seems like so much of our work has almost prepared us for where we are in 2025 without even realizing this is where we're going to be in ministry. And I want to couch it in the terms of the social, political things that are going on right now. And so much of that, I think, is calling a lot of us to go back to what I call our tap groups of ministry and pull out that social justice side of us and a lot of areas that we're having to work with people on, especially as it relates to the United States president with a lot of executive orders that are coming out right now. And so I kind of want to get our topic to some of that, but most importantly, I think the topic we really want to talk about is around U.S. immigration, or just immigration issues and policies right now, because I think a lot of that, as you mentioned earlier, will be the tap tentacle to a lot of the topics that we probably want to talk about. So, if you give me your 35,000 feet pitch on immigration right now, what is your take on the immigration position that we find ourselves here in the United States?
Well, this immigration position is not new. It has always been a problematic and difficult issue in the United States, one that is frequently a mask for other issues,
Mm,
particularly issues of racism and xenophobia, and class issues also, and difficult for us to own our collective lineage and history as a nation that originally colonized the indigenous peoples and indigenous nations that were here and then also imported as chattel slavery people from another continent uh, to be an important and integral part of our nation's history and population, and then has been a constant source of destination point for people seeking refuge, economic, religious, political asylum from literally all around the world. And
mm,
that's always been true. And it's always been problematic for us to own collectively. So here's where I say, who's the we here? Well, in this case, and you and I are both citizens of the United States of America. We own this history. It's a complex history, but I think that what's happening right now is, and it's unfortunately, it's the second act for the same bad leader, if I may say so. And I don't like to even demonize President Trump. I'll be honest with you, because it's always a system. I never believe that it's ever about a person.
mm,
It's a system that is complex and cooperative. But President Trump was elected. It was a marker of strong, I still think, racist and xenophobic sentiments in our country.
mm,
Um, and though he has a certain kind of power right now, it does not alleviate all of us collectively from a responsibility for challenging and changing what's unfolding among us. And this recent iteration, these series of executive orders, which he did say he was going to do, I mean, no one can say, oh, I'm shocked.
right.
And some of them are policies that he also enacted or embraced in his first presidency, maybe in a different form, but I think are heinous, hateful, evil, and nothing short of it.
Mhm,
And they continue to exploit and stigmatize people who are migrants exercising the human right to migrate,
mhm,
you know, and it doesn't serve anybody to stigmatize and criminalize and demonize people who are exercising the human right of migration. But it is serving a broader purpose right now to to persecute and prosecute in the ways that they are being prosecuted by our government. And that larger purpose is not a good one.
Yeah.
Uh, and it was a long answer, but I do
Yeah.
think it does get at it. This is all about race. It is all about class. It is all about gender. All of these interrelated issues are being reflected in the series of executive orders that President Trump is signing into law, whether or not they'll prove constitutional or not. They're already taking place
Yeah.
in every way. Aid to developing countries and other countries, even around the issue of HIV, which is dear to both of us,
Right.
already been stopped, and people are losing their jobs who are providing necessary medical aid just around this one issue of HIV and AIDS through the dismantling of USAID and also through our withdrawal, God help us, from the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, so the immigration piece, though, is an intersectional piece.
Mhm.
We joked about this earlier, but I think in some ways, President Trump's administration and his policies reveal a certain intersectional awareness
Mhm.
of all these issues. And uh, and they're not new. That's the thing. I mean, in 2016, we saw his immediate Muslim travel ban, if you remember that, and
Mhm.
also the introduction of the family separation policy.
Mhm.
That was one of the most evil things our country has ever done. Hard to pick one, but if we dial it back, even those 8 or 9 years now, we can see that it's a strategy that has worked before for him to divide and conquer and exploit. And it's never about the issue.
Right. Right.
Unfortunately, it has real life consequences for it. And, I hope if anything out of this conversation, I know you have a broad intersectional audience, but I know that it's also a significantly LGBT and queer audience
Mhm.
and religious too. It's time for us to step up on immigration as if it were something that we more readily recognized as a heart issue
Yeah.
or an issue that affects us. Now, we say this because, first of all, many migrants and immigrants are LGBTQ. So that alone could be enough self-interest to motivate our solidarity, but it's
I
not.
think, yeah.
Um, so just so we're clear about that, though, this is us in every way possible. And then also, I think it's an issue that ties to our own understanding of who we are and how and what we've become. Many gay people, speaking for myself, also left, and I'm 67, so uh, grew up in a place that was not a congenial or safe place to be gay.
Mhm.
Uh, for me, it was in Michigan, and found my way to Sanctuary in an urban center, New York City,
Mhm.
when I was 18, so that I could have a safe place to be gay.
Mhm.
That was my primary principal reason for being there. And uh, the visibility of the gay community is one where I sought safety in numbers, and uh, and that became true also when I moved to San Francisco in the 80s to pastor a church in a gay neighborhood. What we saw happening there then was that people with HIV and AIDS came from not only around the country, but around the world to
Mhm.
seek a level of care and safety as persons with HIV and AIDS
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah.
In 1986, I remember that there was a state proposition in California called the LaRouche Initiative, Proposition 64, that called for the mandatory quarantining of people with HIV/AIDS. It was
Mhm.
put on the ballot, uh, and it did not pass. It was also thought to be unconstitutional, but it didn't fail by huge numbers
Right.
either. And so, but it didn't pass.
Right.
Uh, but we were vulnerable. We were all living together for safety in these places where we could be readily identified, and we were threatened with mass incarceration and deportation
Yeah.
in a state, California, that has already had a history of that with Executive Order 9066 in 1943, when President Roosevelt ordered the unconstitutional incarceration of Japanese and Japanese American citizens, 120,000,
Yeah.
right here in California. So it had a historical resonance
Yeah.
too. We know what it means to be vulnerable and we know what it means to be exploited and what it means to be this the brunt of unfair legal remedies that are really just a mask. In that
Right.
case, for homophobia, in this and HIV phobia. And in this case, I think that's what we're seeing yet again here. So, especially to the queer community, I want to say, step up, people.
Yeah. Yeah.
We know better. We know what this is like, and we have a heart connection as well as an historical connection.
Yeah. When
So,
you said that about California, I immediately went to George Takei, because he often has spoken about, being in the internment camp there in
right,
California. And, he's out, he's gay, and, he's like checked two of the things on the margins, if you will. And I think you're absolutely right when it comes down to, just our community. Well, let me just ask the question. Why have we not stepped up? Why do you feel the gay community has not stepped up enough when it comes to immigration issues? Is it because we don't have to worry about the immigration issue as a whole? It's not about us. It's not a queer thing. It's not a gay thing. Why do you think we haven't stepped up in that area or stepped up enough?
the fear is that we have, through assimilation, lost our fire, our
Mhm.
fervor around the importance of, or I shouldn't say through, but because of assimilation.
Mm.
You get a liberation movement gets just enough of a piece of a pie to make us less invested in
Mhm.
our own liberation as well as in the liberation of others.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds a little heady, but I do really think that that's true. Gaining certain gains that like marriage equality or being able to be in the military, which is, as we are seeing right now, being dismantled, um, were not structural enough change issues. It
Mhm.
was stressing, look, we're like you, not we're not like you. And I think that's a mistake. Our embrace of assimilation when we should, when I would have preferred us to say, no, we're different. And what we want to preserve is the capacity to be different, that difference itself in society. So I think that our privileges outweigh our risk-taking desire at the moment.
Yeah.
It's a mistake, but it's not very attractive.
All right.
But I do think it's time for us to get real.
Yeah.
This whole notion that where a person is born should determine what their access to healthcare and to the right to move and to upward mobility, it's specious.
Yeah.
Uh, and I just don't think it serves us at all.
Yeah.
So I don't know why there's not more LGBT voice. I don't know why there's not more LGB voice right now on transgender issues and transgender solidarity. Uh, but it doesn't matter why exactly, as long as we're willing to examine it
Right.
and change it.
Right.
Because now is the time to change.
Right.
It's never too
Exactly.
late to change, but it's a little late in the game for us to be standing on the sidelines.
Yeah.
We have to step up.
I had a friend of mine who's the former deputy director for the Department of Treasury, and she often says to me, we have these discussions. She says, Robert, we can't just be focused on, and she's, her older lesbian. She goes, we just can't be focused on the gay issues right now. She says, if we're not concerned about the bigger issues, the gay issues won't matter. And I think he was right on that in that perspective, especially on the immigration, because I think to your point, if we don't focus on immigration, and there's a lot of things that falls underneath that, we get housing, healthcare, people that those areas may not matter as much as it seems, but they really do feed into the bigger picture of we are systematically being erased. I mean, and that's what it feels like to me. Like when we talk about the transgender community for just a minute, it seems like every attempt is being made to erase the transgender community from the United States of America, from our
Right.
armed services. I have a good friend, Logan, who's there. He's the forefront of the transgender community in armed services, and it's like everything has been systematically done. And so my question is who's next? I mean, I think that's the question we all need to be asking, really, is, am I going to be the next one that this administration is going to target? So why, again, why aren't we doing more to support our transgender community? That has always baffled me. I don't know. Maybe you have the answer.
It makes no sense to me,
Yeah,
but it behooves us to remember our LGBT liberation movement comes in a lineage of other liberation movements.
right,
And there would be no gay liberation movement without the feminist movement of the second wave feminist movement of the 60s and 70s. And there would be no feminist and gay liberation movements had it not been for the civil rights movement of the 1940s,
Right.
really, 50s, 60s. Um, and that's just one way of tracing the lineage. But
Mhm.
the lineage does, it calls us to account for caring about all of these issues.
Mhm.
We come from somewhere, and part of the lineage of the civil rights movement, which is part of a 400-year history of resistance. I recognize that historically, but is a more recent, some of us are alive
Mhm.
who remember those things. And part of it was civil disobedience when necessary, as
Mhm.
well as voting, as well as community organizing, were all effective strategies that we need to exercise again
Right.
if necessary.
Right.
I realized I found an old sermon of mine from the 1980s in which I said um, around the HIV Prop 64 uh, quarantining battle, if you
Mhm.
will, that they can't enforce a law that we won't submit to. And I said that in a sermon, and I just thought, oh my God, I remembered that because this is what we need to be saying
Right.
right now around the deportations.
Yeah.
Uh, and I don't know what that looks like exactly, but that kind of activity, that's part of our heritage also. And to remember, we have to up the ante and take some risks and risk our privileges,
Yeah.
um, because it's morally wrong.
Yeah.
And then also I do think it ultimately affects us.
Yeah.
There are so many ways in which not being honest about our history or being ignorant about it, and why these attacks on critical race theory and DEI are so important.
Yeah.
I come from a family of, all four of my grandparents have, shall we say, sketchy immigration stories now from European countries, but still, if, why aren't, why is anyone who can trace their background through either uh, immigration or through forced deportation or enslavement, why aren't we just up in arms about this? It makes no sense to me other than we think that our privilege will protect us
Right.
somehow and insulate us from it. And I hate to be
Yeah.
cynical in that way, but I do think it's true. If you just press almost anyone's story a little bit, you find that this is a contradiction and
Right.
not it shouldn't be business as usual. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I
Do you think that we are, and I'm going to use the old slogan, that we are at or are we stepping into an act up, act out moment?
uh, you're singing my song. What's my favorite hymn? Act up, fight back, fight AIDS, and then after that, it's Blessed Assurance because I like that one. But it really is
Yeah.
no kidding. Disrupt, change, engage, fight back, act up, and you know how the AIDS chant itself from the '80s, late '80s. Which was originally Act Up, Fight Back, Fight AIDS,
Mhm.
has now morphed in some circles to Act Up, Fight Back, End AIDS.
Mhm.
I like that because it reminds us that there is no circumstance that needs change that we can't both evolve around and actually bring an end to.
Right.
I do not believe that racism, classism, and anti-immigrant sentiment is innate or inevitable. It is changeable, mutable, resistible, and transformable. And so, right now, we have to say abolish ICE. You
Mm.
know, as
Mm.
a statement as important as the Nicene Creed, and I can recite that from memory. And I hope that we can also say, particularly because we're faith-based people, you and I.
Mhm.
No, abolish ICE. That's a religious statement. That's a creedal statement right now.
Yeah.
That is a secret police. It's unaccountable, and it's exercising way too much. And so the strategy right now among immigration activist groups that I'm very committed to, one in particular called Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity,
Mm.
but there are many, lots of places, is partly around accompaniment, partly around documenting what's taking place.
Mhm.
For myself personally, that's not enough.
Right.
I'm not going to do this. I remember in 2016 when I was in Boston and pastor of the Congregational Church in Needham, Massachusetts, and also working with MCC Boston. The rounding up and family separation of people who were undocumented, and they were being held in a prison in downtown Boston.
Mhm.
That we could go and we had weekly rallies through Faith in Action and other groups outside the prison where the prisoners could see us. We would gather on a freeway overpass every Sunday afternoon and do signs, and we made sounds so that they could hear us and we could hear them. We have been here before,
Mhm.
and I felt then we were too passive
Mm.
and our churches were too reluctant to risk the privileges of tax exemption and property ownership to become sanctuary places. Remember how much work it was to just try and get one church in a neighborhood
Yeah.
to say that they would house someone who was being hounded by our secret police, by ICE?
Yeah.
That was we can't even possibly provide that kind of sanctuary today. So Sanctuary 2025 looks different.
Yeah.
There aren't enough churches to hide people in,
Yeah.
right? And but there are enough of us to stand up and say, no, we are not going to allow this.
Yeah.
The time to stop it is now. Before they start filling prisons, before they start restocking Guantanamo, God
Yeah.
help us, um, or repurposing prisons, which is what's happening
Yeah.
here locally, to become a deportation center. Remember the images of children in cages.
Yes.
Okay.
I
I
was
don't
just
know
about
who
to
that
go
takes
there.
to
Yeah.
motivate us.
Yeah.
Hello, you
Yeah.
know. And I mean, there are other issues too, like this. What is wrong with us that we can't summon a level of activism? It's going to be different for different people. I think giving money is an important act of
Mhm.
political resistance. We should be giving money in large amounts right now to immigrant groups, uh, immigration advocacy and immigration direct aid groups that are helping families who are being separated and who are suffering the economic consequences already of this heinous policies that are being enacted. So we can give money, we can put our bodies on the line, and we can hold our elected representatives accountable. I, I don't even know what to say about the Democratic Party right now. I have a deep commitment to it, and it's not enough.
Yeah.
What's happening is not enough. Disrupt,
Yeah.
resist, act up, use your voice, and then the rest of us have got to organize around these issues.
I
If
was
enough people stand up, it will be harder for it to proceed.
right. I was listen to some, I'm going to say some of the our ancestors, if you will, from Harvey Milk days, and kind of bringing it all forward, and it was kind of being complacent about, we fought our fight, we've done enough. Now it's time for the next generation to do this. I'm kind of a both and in the area, and my end point is we still need that generation to show other generations how it was done, how it is done, and how you can be the voice to call these issues out without the fear of repercussion. Because I think that's the thing. A lot of people fear these days. You name one of them, around around tax exemption status and property status. I did a sermon recently about damn the torpedoes and full speed ahead. That we can't let these things hold us back from doing what is right. And so I think we still need those voices to be advocates and remind us. If you've said often here today, we've been through this before. We know what this looks like. It looks very like similar parts of our history. And the thing that scares me is how many people are willing to just be complacent and almost say, it's not my issue, it's not my area. I'm in a bubble, I'm in a protected class, and just not care about their fellow human being. Not they don't care about their neighbor almost. And so I think that's the religious part of it that gets me. And the spiritual part is like, how can we not care about our neighbor, regardless as to where our neighbor may be from, what our neighbor may do, what they may look like? How do we care for our neighbors in a way that it moves us to act and to be there for them?
Well, complacency is complicity. I really
Yeah.
feel that right now. It's you're already there. You're complacent, you're complicit. And I'm willing to examine my own self in the light of that. I don't mean to come off in any way as if in superior or something. Uh, I I am willing to examine every single day what it means to have the privileges I have, even around health insurance and things
Right.
like that. We should be outraged that healthcare continues to be a privilege in the United States. I'm sorry, Bernie Sanders was right on healthcare and on many issues. as I look back on it. Uh, and even our own capacity, well, I'm going to really go there right now, to be bystanders around our country's involvement in Israel and Palestine
Mm,
are a
mhm.
dangerous marker for us. We should be up in arms about that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we haven't found a way successfully to have meaningful interfaith dialogue and action
Yeah.
on this issue.
Yeah.
I recognize the complexity of it, but I do know this 45,000 dead Gazans,
Yeah.
two-thirds of whom are women and children.
Yeah.
And where is the voice of the church on this?
Yeah. Hello.
You
Yeah.
know, silent.
Yeah.
Silence is not enough. So what's already happening is always a marker of what could happen next,
Yeah.
right? So I think that this is another moment for us to step up
Yeah.
around what is happening there before we allow Trump to do there
Right.
what he's trying to do here.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think we need those voices that are out there that's advocating just what you're saying. And we're being honest here, and we're live recording this. I keep wondering, where are the religious voices right now? I mean, it's like I don't know where they are, and it's like I'm listening for certain voices. I'm listening to hear certain voices, and I'm just not hearing them. And I'm not seeing them. And maybe I don't think I'm in a vacuum. I don't think I'm in a tunnel, but I'm just not hearing the pushback or seeing the pushback that I thought we would be seeing or ought to be seeing. Especially, we're like a little less than a month into a new president's administration with a lot of social, economical issues going on that's affecting so many parts of our communities, and I just don't see it. Maybe it's just me.
well, and so social media has changed us somewhat then, and I think our liberation experience also should teach us something. In the past, we have been overly reliant upon individual voices, prophetic voices. We still have some of those voices now, and I don't want to minimize that, William Barber, and as
Wait.
others, I mean, in my own little TFAM corner of the world, I feel like uh, Bishop Yvette Plunder exercises that kind of unstinting prophetic voice more than any religious leader I know. Um, but where the action is not famous people or leaders, it's on the ground.
Yeah.
It's in, for us as church people, it's in the parish or in the cathedral in your case. Uh, it's what are we doing? We don't need, we have access to social media. We can use that voice,
Mhm.
make our own voice visible, but not just our voice, but as always, our bodies. This is the one thing that we have, right? This we learned this, you and I know this about HIV and AIDS, right? The body is the site of divine revelation. When God wants to make an important statement, God uses the body.
Right.
That's the history of incarnation. That's what we believe in our uniquely Christian tradition. And we have to, you know, use our bodies right now. It
Yeah.
includes our voices, it includes our material resources, but it also includes really risk taking with our bodies on this and other issues where people are imperiled,
Yeah.
where their safety, where their self-determination is imperiled.
Yeah.
You know, we're drawing in all the issues. Reproductive justice is an important one.
Yeah.
We, as gay men with HIV, what do we know? That our own history is tied to the history of women's reproductive rights. And women generally, and lesbians in particular, were very strong allies and supporters of us during the most critical early years of HIV and AIDS.
Mhm.
Are we demonstrating our debt and our awareness of that solidarity through our visible advocacy
Right.
of women's reproductive rights, of protecting legal abortion? We're afraid to even say the word. I don't mind saying I'm pro-abortion. Okay, kill me. I mean, I think that we have to
I think there'll be a
overcome.
lot of us, but
Yeah, I don't think we have to overcome our hesitancy around the language.
yeah.
And I don't say that lightly or flippantly. I mean, I just really feel like we have to say it. The immigration policy is about racism.
Right.
Uh, the uh, uh, the reproductive rights, the bans on abortion are about sexism. Uh,
Yeah.
and we've got to really, uh, step up on that. I just heard Trump say as he was signing or was talking about the dismantling of DEI programs in the government. We're going to build a society that is colorblind, and he talked specifically about race, the inclusion of race and gender, the
Right.
forced inclusion of race and gender into every conversation. You know what? Race and gender belongs in every conversation.
Yeah.
It actually does. And we have to say it and bring it to bear because that's what this is about. All these things are about that. He said we're going to create a race blind, and then the corollary would have been, I guess, gender blind, but he said a state of equality. So he couldn't even bring himself to acknowledge gender in it.
Mhm.
And, we cannot give any, we can't be soft on these issues. Um, Bring it up, challenge it, um, use local strategies
Yeah.
every Sunday at church. And this is not easy. I love my congregational church in Belmont, California. It's liberal, it's small, the people are lovely. And I understand that my role with them as pastor and teacher is to make sure that every week we are addressing race, gender, and in this case, xenophobia around immigration.
Mhm.
We may not be affected by it because of our privilege, but I know it's my role as a pastor to educate and agitate
Yeah.
alongside them on these issues.
Yeah.
And, finding that balance between being, a consoling, comforting pastoral presence while also drawing attention to what's happening in the broader society. We've got to do that as pastors. That's our role right now.
Yeah.
Uh, so I don't know. Uh,
Well, you know what, Jim? Here's the thing. It's like time has flown.
yeah,
I don't I gotta have you back to talk about one issue. I guess we got a lot of them in on this one. But I want to ask you one question. I'll let you and I'll do them in order here. Let me just ask you it. What would be your number one thing that you would say to people today? I mean, you've called people out of their comfort zone, you're challenging privileges, you're doing it. What would be the one thing that you would say, this is the one thing I really want people to think about today?
well, to examine the ways in which these unfair and not just unfair, but unjust immigration policies are additionally masks for racism and classism in the situations that we find ourselves, whatever context we're in.
Mhm.
Develop relationships, meaningful, real relationships on a grassroots level that demonstrate our commitment to each other
Mm,
around the issues of race and class and gender, as well as overtly right now about immigration.
mhm.
If you're not a member of the NAACP, join it, and
Yes.
then get involved in a local chapter. If you're not a member of the ACLU, join it. If you're not involved in some kind of grassroots immigration expression right now, seek one out and become involved in it. Give money as well as time, or give what you have and pray about it. I mean, I think that's the thing. If I were to say one more thing, I truly believe, Robert, in the power of prayer,
Mm,
that it changes us as well as helps us change situations.
mhm.
So put front and center, along with prayers for healing and prayers for mourning the dead, all these legitimate, fundamental, life-saving aspects of our spiritual lives. Pray about race, class, and gender inequity. Uh, Make it part of your prayer life, your ongoing dialogue with God, however you think about Jesus, or in my case, Mary,
Mhm.
personalize it, uh, and really believe that our faith can make a difference right now, because I really believe that.
Yeah.
So,
And I know that this is my next question for you. I know that you're an avid reader. You probably have about 15 books going at one time. But what are you reading right now, and what's your takeaway back to the community to say, here's what I'm reading, and here's how I think this is applicable to what's going on today.
I was just reading the Imani Perry book about the color blue, which is about the history of racism in the United States, but culturally the use of blue in relation to the African American and Black communities. I'd recommend that. Um, I'm always reading gay and AIDS novels, and I can't even pick one. but I'm going to say one that's going to be a little queer. Okay. But I just read, and it's not for everybody, but Edmund White has a memoir called The Loves of My Life, a sex memoir.
Ooh.
And what I appreciated about it is his author, gay author in the 80s, writes a candid, truthful life story around the meaning of his own sexual behavior and all the thousands of men he has loved. And I love it because it is just so out there and so truthful and beautifully written that it has challenged me to be candid and truthful about the meaning even of sexuality in my own life.
Mm.
Um, that's one. And I'm going to recommend a film about that because I worked on it and it's now available for rental. It's called Sally, uh, and it's about Sally Gerhardt, who was an early feminist leader in the gay community in San Francisco in the 70s and 80s. She worked alongside Harvey Milk and then wrote a number of lesbian feminist novels and essays, including one of the first books about homosexuality in the church, called Loving Women, Loving Men, with Bill Johnson, who was an openly gay minister in the United Church of Christ. So the movie is called Sally, and it's a current documentary. It's available through Women Make Films, and I urge you to show it because it tells the feminist story and also shows how one person can make a difference over the course of their lifetime. So that, you didn't tell me this in advance, or I would have come up with a reading list. You know, I love that. Invite me back to talk about books, and I'll have 20 right here and say, let's talk about books. I'm going to recommend one more because I just read it in our church book group called Night Flyer by Taya Miles. And it's a biography, a faith biography, as she calls it, of Harriet Tubman.
Mm.
And it just was published this year. Um, and I probably read a dozen, literally, books about Harriet Tubman because she fascinates me. But her experience as mystic, public mystic, as well as activist, putting her life on the line, saving hundreds of people, and through a life immersed in and based in faith, um, is not only an important history to reclaim and talk about in this time of suppression of Black history in our country, literally suppression, uh, but also she's an inspiration for the present. I could as much pray to Harriet Tubman as I do already to Jesus Christ and to Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Wow.
I mean, that's how important I think that she can be. So that was kind of a zany answer, but remember, you've known me a long time, and I know books.
Okay, last question. Then we'll wrap this. Last question. So between the two of us, we have probably at some point, and you way more than me, trained, I'm going to say a minimum of 300 clergy
Yeah, that's true.
throughout our career. And you've taught at seminaries around the globe, documents and everything else. What would you say to those clergy that you have trained today about frontline activism, about boots on the street? What would be your word of encouragement if you had to, if they was all in an auditorium or the stadium, because there's so many, and we were all in the stadium, what would be in light of what we're facing today, what would be your word of encouragement to all of us?
Well, first of all, it would be a party and it would be fun. And we would sing old favorites like Act Up, Fight Back, Fight AIDS, as well as the old hymns, because I love those too. Um, and I want to recommend a composer, Mark Miller, who writes hymns right now and church music that's inspiring and evocative of activism. But having said that, I would say to everyone, we know what we have to do. It doesn't matter where you're living out your ministry right now. It could be in churches, it could be in a hospital, it could be in a school, it could be in commerce. God called you for a reason. God called each of us for a reason. And there's a reason why we got ordained, went through that whole process. And no matter where we are living it out, it's not just what we learned, it's not just, uh, it's who we are,
Mm.
right? As well as what we do. Bring that calling to bear in situations that require social change, which is everything, right? Uh, this is the time. Step up, step out. And it doesn't matter what form your ministry is taking right now. Remember, it's who you are as well as what you do, and you have a contribution to make. The God who called you then is calling you still and saying, act up, fight back, end AIDS.
All right. Well, that's today with Jim Mitulski. Jim, thank you for making time for me today. You definitely have an invitation to come back because we did not go anywhere on the topics that I really thought we was going to cover today. So you'll definitely get invited to come back. So
Well,
thank you
that's
so
what we
much.
do when we talk, Robert. So,
Like I said, this will be conversation and was a great conversation. So thank you, and I'll look forward to having you again on Bishop Talk.
I can't wait.
All
Take
right,
care,
thank
Robert.
you.
See you later. Bye.